Chronicles of Narnia, The Last Battle by C.S. Lewis, Chapter 6, A Good Night's Work. About 4 hours later, Trunnion flung himself into one of the bunks to snatch a little sleep. The Teal children were already snoring. He had made them go to bed before they did, because he would have to step up most of the night, and he knew that at their age they couldn't do without sleep. Also, he had tried them out. First he had given Jill some practice in archery and found that, though not up to Narnian standards, she was not really that bad. Indeed, she had succeeded in shooting a rabbit, not a talking rabbit, of course, though lots of the ordinary kind about in Western Narnia, and it was already skinned, cleaned, and hanging up. He found that both children knew all about his chilly and smelly job. They had learned that kind of thing on their great journey through the giant land in the days of Prince Aurelian. He had tried to teach Eustace how to use his sword and shield. Eustace had learned quite a lot about sword fighting on his early adventures that had been with a straight Narnian sword. He had never handled a curved calamine scimitar that made it hard, for many of the strokes were quite different, and some habits he had learned with the long sword had now been unlearned again. But Trunnion found that he had a good eye and was very quick on his feet. He was surprised at the strength of both children. In fact, they both seemed to be already much stronger and bigger and more grown-up than they had been when they met him the first few hours ago. It was one of the effects which Narnian air often has on visitors from our world. All three of them agreed that the very first thing they must do was go back to the stable hill and try to rescue Jewel the unicorn. After that they succeeded. They would try to get away eastward and meet little army with Runewit the Senator would be bringing from Chair Paravel. An experienced warrior and huntsman like Trunnion can always wake up at the time he wants, so he gave himself till 9 o'clock that night and put all worries out of his head and fell asleep at once. It seemed only a moment later when he woke, but he knew by light exactly feel of things that he had timed his sleep exactly. He got up, put on his helmet and turban, he had slept in his mail shirt, and then shook the other two till they woke up. They looked, to tell the truth, very grand, the smallest. They climbed out of their bunks, and there was a good deal of yawning. "Now," said Trunnion, "we go north from here. By good fortune, this is Starry Night, and it will be much shorter than our journey this morning, for when we went around about, we shall now go straight. We are challenged. Then do you two hold your peace, and I will my best talk like the cursed, cruel, proud lord of Calaman. If I draw my sword, then thou, Eustace, must do likewise, and Joel leap behind us and stand with the arrow on the string. If I cry home, then fly for the tower, both of you, and let none try to fight on, not even one stroke, after I give in the retreat. Such false valor has spoiled many notable plans and wars. Now, friends, in the name of Aslan, let us go forward." Out they went into the cold night. All great northern stars were burning above the treetops. The north star of that which is called the Spearhead, it is brighter than our pole star. For a time they could go straight towards the spearhead, but presently they came to a dense thicket so that they had to go out of their course to get around it. After that, for they were still overshadowed by the branches, it was hard to pick up their bearings. It was Jill who set them right again. She had been an excellent guide in England, and of course she knew her Narnian stars perfectly, having travelled so much in the wild northern lands, and could speak out the direction from other stars even if the spearhead was hidden. As soon as Trunnion saw that she was the best pathfinder of the three of them, he put her in front. And then he was astonished how silently and almost invisibly she glided on before him. "By the main," he whispered to Eustace, "this girl's a wondrous wood maid. If she had Dryad's blood on her, she could scarce do it better." "She's so small, that's what helps," whispered Eustace. But Jill stood in front of her. "Shh, less noise." All around them the wood was very quiet. Indeed, it was far too quiet. On an ordinary Narnian night there ought to have been noises, occasional cheery "good night" from a hedgehog, or the cry of an owl overhead, perhaps a flute in the distance to tell the fauns of dancing, or some throbbing, hammering noises from the dwarfs underground. All that silence, gloom, and fear reigned over Narnia. After that time they began to go steeply uphill, and the trees grew further apart. Trunnion could dimly make out the well-known hilltop on the stable. Jill was now going with more and more caution. She kept on making signs to theirs with her hand to do the same. Then she stopped dead still, and Trunnion saw her gradually slink down into the grass and disappear without a sound. A moment later she rose again, put her mouth so close to Trunnion's ear, and said in the lowest possible whisper, "Get down. Thee better." She said "thee" for "C," not because she had a lisp, but because she knew the hissing of the letter S is the part of whisper most likely to be overheard. Trunnion at once lay down, almost silently as Jill, but not as quite, for he was heavier and older. And once they were down, he saw from how that position And once they were down, he saw from how that position you could see the edge of the hill sharp against the star-strewn sky. Two black shapes rose against it. One was a stable, and the other, a few front of it, was a Calamine sentry. He was keeping very ill watch, not walking or even standing, but sitting with his spear over his shoulder and his chin on his chest. "Well done," said Trinian to Jill. She had shown him exactly what he needed to know. They got up, and Trinian now took the lead. Very slowly, hardly daring to breathe, they made their way up to a little clump of trees which was not more than 40 feet away from the Senate Hill. "Wait here till I come again," he whispered to the other two. "If I miscarry, fly." Then he sauntered out boldly in full view of the enemy. The man started when he saw him, and was going to jump to his feet. He was afraid if Trinian might be one of his own officers, that he would get into trouble for sitting down. But before he could get up, Trinian had dropped one knee beside him, saying, "Art thou warrior of the Tishrocks? May he live forever? It cheers my heart to meet thee among all these beasts and devils of Narnians. Give me thy hand, friend." Before he well knew what was happening, Calamine's sentry found his right hand seized in a mighty grip. The next instant someone was kneeling on his legs and a dagger was pressed against his neck. "One noise and thou art dead," said Trinian in his ear. "Tell me where the unicorn is, and thou shalt live." "Behind the stable, O my master," stammered the unfortunate man. "Good. Rise up and lead me to him." As the man got up, the point of the dagger never left his neck. It only travelled around, cold and rather ticklish, as Trinian got behind him and settled it at a convenient place under his ear. Trembling, he went to the back of the stable. Though it was dark, Trinian could see the white shape of Jewel at once. "Hush," he said. "Do not neigh. Yes, Jewel, it is I. Have I tied thee?" Hobbled by all four legs, tied with a bride to a ring in the stable wall, came Jewel's voice. "Stand here, sentry, with your back to the wall. Now, Jewel, set the point of your horn against this Calamine's breast." "With a good will, sire," said Jewel. "If he moves, rive him to the heart." Then in a few seconds Trinian cut the ropes. With the remains of them he bound the sentry hand and foot. Finally he made him open his mouth, stuffed it full of grass, and tied him from scalp to chin so that he would make no noise, lowered the man into a sitting position, and set him against the wall. "I have done thee some discourtesy, soldier," said Trinian, "but such was my deed. If we meet again, I may happen to thee a better turn. Now, Jewel, let us go softly." He put his left arm around the beast's neck and bent and kissed its nose. Both had great joy. They went back as quietly as possible to the place where he had left the children. It was darker there under the trees, and nearly ran into Eustace before he saw him. "All's well," whispered Trinian. "Good night's work. Now for home." They turned and had gone a few paces where Eustace said, "Where are you, Paul?" There was no answer. "Is Jill on the other side of you, sire?" he asked. "What?" said Trinian. "Is she not on the other side of you?" It was a terrible moment. They dared not shout, but they whispered her name in the loudest whisper they could manage. There was no reply. "Did she go from you while I was away?" asked Trinian. "I didn't see or hear her go," said Eustace. "But she could have gone without my knowing. She can be as quiet as a cat. You've seen for yourself." At that moment a far-off drum beat was heard. Jewel moved his ears forward. "Dwarfs," he said. "And treacherous dwarfs, enemies as likely as not," admitted Trinian. "And here comes something on hooves, much nearer," said Jewel. The two humans and the unicorn stood dead still. There were now so many different things to worry about that they didn't know what to do. The noise of hoofs came steadily nearer, and then quite close to them a voice whispered, "Hello! Are you all there?" Thank heaven, it was Jill's. "Where the devil have you been to?" said Eustace in a furious whisper, for he had been very frightened. "In the stable," gasped Jill, but it was the sort of gasp you give when you're struggling with suppressed laughter. "Oh," growled Eustace, "you think it funny, do you? Well, all I can say is—" "Have you got Jewel, sire?" asked Jill. "Yes, here he is. What is that beast with you?" "That's him," said Jewel. "But let's be off home before anyone wakes up." And again there came little explosions of laughter. The others obeyed at once, for they had already lingered enough in that dangerous place, and the dwarf drum seemed to have come a little nearer. It was only after they had been walking southward for several minutes that Eustace said, "Got him? What do you mean?" "The false Aslan," said Jill. "What?" said Trinian. "Where have you been? What have you done?" "Well, sire," said Jill, "as soon as I saw that you got the sentry out of the way, I thought I hadn't better have a look inside the stable and see what really is there. So I crawled along. It was as easy as anything to draw the bolt. Of course it was pitch black inside and smelled like any other stable. Then I struck a light and, Would you believe it? There is nothing at all but this old donkey with a bundle of lion skin tied on his neck. So I drew my knife and told him he'd have to come along with me. As a matter of fact, I needn't have threatened him with the knife at all. He was very fed up with the stable and quite ready to come. Weren't you puzzled, dear? Great Scott! Said Eustace. Well, I'm jiggered. I was jolly angry with you a moment ago, but I think it was mean of you to sneak off without the rest of us. But I must admit, well, I mean to say, it was a perfectly gorgeous thing to do. If she was a boy, she'd have to be knighted, wouldn't she, sire? If she was a boy, said Trinian, she'd whip for disobeying orders. And in the dark no one could see whether he said this with a frown or a smile. Next minute there was the sound of rasping metal. What are you doing, sire? Said Giles sharply. Drawing in my sword and smite the head of the accursed ass, said Trinian with a terrible voice. Stand clear, girl. Oh, don't, please don't, said Joel. Really, you mustn't. It wasn't quite his fault. It was all the ape. He didn't know any better, and he's very sorry. And he's a nice donkey. His name's Puzzle, and I've got my arms around his neck. Joel, said Trinian, you're the bravest and most wood-wise of all my subjects, but also the most malapert and disobedient. Well, let the ass live. But you have to say for yourself, ass. Me, sire? Came the donkey's voice. I'm sure I'm very sorry if I've done wrong. The ape said Aslan wanted me to dress up like that, and I thought he'd know. I'm not clever like him. I only did what I was told. It wasn't any fun for me living in that stable. I don't even know what it's been going outside. He never let me out except for a minute or two at night. Some days they forgot to give me any water too. Sire, said Jewel, those dwarfs are coming nearer and nearer. Do we want to meet them? Trinian thought for a moment and suddenly gave a great laugh out loud. Then he spoke, this time not in a whisper. By the lion, he said, I'm growing slow-witted. Meet them? Certainly we will meet them. We will meet anyone now. We have this ass to show them. Let them see the thing they have feared and bowed to. We can show them the truth of the ape's vile plot. His secret's out. The tide has turned. Tomorrow we shall hang that ape on the highest tree in Narnia. No more whispering and sulking in disguises. Where are these honest dwarfs? We have good news for them. When you have been whispering for hours and the mere sound of anyone talking out loud was a wonderfully stirring effect. The whole party began talking and laughing. Even Puzzle lifted up his head and gave a grand ee-aw, 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 ee-ee thing that Ape hadn't allowed him to do for days. And they set off in the direction of the drumming. It grew steadily louder, and soon they could see torchlight as well. They came out on one of those rough roads, we should call them roads at England, which ran through Lantern Waste. And there, marching sturdily along, were about 30 dwarfs, all with their little spades and mattocks over their shoulders. 2 armed Calamines led the column, and 2 more brought up the rear. Stay! Thundered Trinian as he stepped out on the road. Stay, soldiers! Whither you lead these Narnian dwarfs, and by whose orders?